How far did you
So let's talk about how we can find the inverse algebraically, not just looking at a picture, because pictures can be deceiving. So to find the inverse, there are a few steps. There's only one step that actually has any real work to it. The first step is to rewrite your notation. So rewrite f of x as y. That's not even doing any work. You're just, instead of writing f of x, you just write y. And then you need to replace all of your x's with y, and you replace the y's with x. And that was the big thing that I told you about just a moment ago. For inverses, x becomes y, y becomes x. You're going backwards there. Once you've done that, you now come to the key ingredient of all of these steps. This is the big guy. You then need to solve your equation for y. And then your final step, which a lot of students forget to do, is that once you have solved for y at the very end, you need to replace y with your inverse function notation. Now, I don't always follow these steps. I'm not saying I'm a cheater. I'm just saying over the years I've found easier ways of doing this. And maybe you'll listen to me and learn, and maybe you won't. It's up to you. So let's do this. I'm going to start with the last example that we went over, where we graphed the cube root of x plus 2. If I follow these steps, the first step says to rewrite f of x as y. Well, that's okay, so y is now equal to the cube root of x plus 2. Is that too easy? Too hard? Just right.
Well, you said that was the easiest step. You said we weren't even really
I didn't even do any work. I mean, we already know that f of x is interchangeable with y, right? Okay, so stop crying about it. I know, it's so sad. Okay, anyway, step 2, replace the y with x and x with y. So what does it look like now?
x equals cube root of y plus 2.
X equals the cube root of y plus 2. Now I've switched colors. Because see, now I'm from the perspective of the inverse, and I need to take this equation and solve it for y. How do you solve this guy for y?
First, you got to subtract the radical by itself.
I've got to subtract 2, right? So subtract 2, and you may not even need to write that step, but if it makes you feel good, go for it. So that's x minus 2 is equal to the cube root of y. And now how do I undo that next layer so I get y by itself? Right, so the inverse of the cube root is to raise to the third power. I'm going to do that on both sides of the equation. And so now I have x minus 2 to the third. Please do not expand that. There's no need to expand that to x to the third minus stuff, right? I think, what would that be? So now I'm trying to think what that would be. It's like, what, minus 6x squared plus 12x minus 8. There's no need for that. Leave it like this. And this is equal to y. Am I done?
No.
No, I do have y by itself, though, right? So instead of writing y, we're supposed to write what?
F of x.
Not f of x, but f inverse of x. So my inverse function is x minus 2 to the third. And what did I just say on the last, on the picture? What did we say it was? Didn't we say it was this? Whoa, Mr. Craig, that's amazeballs!
Now, what do you mean you won't always do all the steps?
I mean, like, I'm not always going to follow this. Okay? And here, let me show you in another example. Okay? We already knew what this guy was supposed to be because we have the graph, right? Let me give you another example of something you could see in your homework. If I say f of x is equal to 7x plus 5 over 4, and I want you to find the inverse function. Now the assumption here is that this is a one-to-one function. And you can throw this into Desmos or your graphing calculator and you're going to find out that this guy's a line and it's got a little slant to it, so it's going to pass the horizontal line test.
I was going to ask that question earlier, but I guess it would have sounded stupid now because we're learning this class.
What?
Only odd functions have, or like, we learned which functions have inverses.
No. And we even said a couple of days ago that just because it's an odd function doesn't mean it has an inverse, because you could look at sine of x. Sine of x is an odd function, but it does not have an inverse unless you restrict the domain. Okay. So some things that you can see for graphs so that you know they pass the horizontal line test. If a function is increasing, excuse me, if a function is increasing or decreasing over its entire domain, it's going to be a one-to-one function. A line like this, because look at it this way, 7/4 x, right? That has a slope of 7 over 4, so from left to right, your line is going up the whole way, right? Yeah, but I don't really care. I just know that it's going to be going up like that, so it's going to pass the horizontal line test. It's not going up and then going down. So it'll pass the horizontal line test, which means it has an inverse. So that's what we're going to find. We're going to follow the steps from above. So what do I do first?
Rewrite f of x as y.
Right? Easy peasy. So I can do that. So that means y is equal to 7x plus 5 over 4. The second step says to do what?
Replace x with y and replace y.
Replace x with y and y with x. So this guy now gets to be rewritten as x is equal to 7y plus 5 over 4. And now we go through the process step by step of getting y by itself. Okay? Don't even worry that this is x over here. This is the only place you see y, so you're trying to strip away those layers just like we've done so many times before with solving an equation. What do I need to get rid of first?
The 4 and the denominator.
I need to get rid of the 4 because the 4 is affecting everything. Okay? So I'll get rid of the 4 by multiplying both sides of the equation here times 4. So we get 4x is equal to 7y plus 5, because we know here that these 4's are going to reduce. Then what do you do?
I'm going to get a y by itself.
Well, that's the whole process here of getting y by itself, but what's the next step of doing that?
Well, I was trying to figure out if I want to move y over to like get 4x and 5 on the same side first before I divide.
Well, you don't want to divide yet. Division is usually the last step that you want to do. We do want to move that 5, so we subtract 5 on both sides. If you don't like having the x on the left, and you'd rather have the y over there, since 4x minus 5 equals 7y, you can just as easily say 7y equals 4x minus 5. It's still going to be the same. And then your last step to get y by itself, that last step to freedom, what do? We divide both sides of the equation by 7. I'm going to go ahead and write y on the left side. So y is equal to 4x minus 5, and all of this is divided by 7. Am I done? Can I stop here and get full credit? No, why not?
You need to replace your y value with
Do you think I'd count off if you didn't write f inverse when I say write the inverse notation? Yes, I would count off. And why would I count off? Well, it is the season for this song, 'cause I'm a mean one, Mr. Craig. And there we go, we're done. Aren't you filled with such happiness where your heart's going to grow to 4 times its original size?
That would be unhealthy, and I think I'd die and cause a lot of sadness underneath my heart.
Well, yeah, you don't want to do that, so you do want to be careful about what you eat. I'm going to have to cut this out too, so I'm going to have to do a lot of editing that I'm not going to do. You know I'm not going to edit anything. No, I'm like honey. Sweet, also raw and unfiltered.
Kind of sticky too. Take everybody with you as you move.
Sounds sticky. Because we're going to the... See, now I've got VeggieTale song stuck in my head. Thanks for that. Now, I want you to check this out. If I go back to this original function, I want you to tell me what the steps are that you take once you plug in x. So what I want you to understand is how the order of operations will work. If I plug in x, what's the first thing you would do after you plug in x? Do you deal with the 7, the 5, or the 4? What happens first? You don't do anything with the 4 yet. And just picture it this way. If I were to plug in, I'm going to use a pencil so I can erase this later on. If I were to plug in, let's say, the number 3 here, right? What do you do first with the 3? See? Yeah. So you're going to multiply times 7 first. After you do that, what was the next step? You would then add 5 to that result, and then what do you do? And then you would divide that result by 4. That's how the order of operations will work if you plug in a number. Do you agree?
It's the inverse.
The inverse, however, will do the inverse operation in a backwards order. It's just like how you get dressed in the morning versus how you get undressed in the evening, right? In the morning, I do this crazy thing where I put on my socks first, then my shoes. I know, it's crazy. I do socks, then shoes. My wife looks at me and says, "You're an idiot. Why are you doing it that way?" At the end of the day, what do I take off first? I take my shoes off, and then I take off my socks, right? I take them off in the backwards order, then I put them on. If I don't, I'm going to have issues. Unless I'm wearing sandals, and I could probably somehow finagle my sock out to my sandals, but we know we don't wear socks with sandals because back when I was in college, they said don't do that. That's a fashion no-no. Who's they? I don't know. People that didn't like me. Anyway, let's go backwards. I gotta edit that out too, right? Man, shoot. Let's go backwards. So when I go backwards, it's going to look like this. I'm going to start with x. What's the inverse of dividing by 4? Multiply times 4. And then the inverse of this, subtract 5. And then what? Divide by 7.
What do you know?
That's the order of operations that I'm going to take to write the inverse. Not only that, but look what I did over here. I did multiply times 4. Then I subtracted 5, then I divided by 7, right? So here's how you're going to write your inverse, just based on these steps that I have right here. Your inverse function, you start with x, and what did I do first? Follow the arrows.
Multiply by 4.
Multiply times 4, then what?
Subtract 5.
I subtract 5 off of that whole value, and then I take that expression and do what? Divide the whole thing by 7, and boom, there it is.